and look at that and help you.
I'm happy. I appreciate
Again, we're doing everything we can.
Okay, but let me just ask you, when
Finest people I know and to
I
the
was asking
ethical
about the
people
contact.
I know.
Let me keep going here.
And I don't like getting into looks. You know, looks don't mean anything, right? You look at Pam, I would never say she's beautiful because that'd be the end of my political career.
Pam Bondi thought she could keep the truth buried. But today, in Parliament, Patty Murray ripped the mask away. What started as routine questioning spiraled into a devastating expose, leaving Bondi cornered, her credibility collapsing in real time. The chamber gasped, the tension unbearable, because once Murray revealed the deceit, there was no going back.
I think that one of the things that I remember from the Anita Hill hearings was the way she was treated by United States senators.
So yes, you must comply. You must give the information to our ICE, to our Homeland Security officers. Multiple homes, a mansion in the Dominican, multiple multi-million dollar homes in Florida, a horse farm valued at millions of dollars, cars, 9 vehicles, I believe, jewelry, millions of dollars in jewelry and cash. Yeah, Sean, I can't confirm or deny whether we have a grand jury, an open investigation on anyone, but the weaponization of our government has ended.
What took place during the recent Senate hearing was not just another political back and forth. It was a moment where long-running concerns about how the Justice Department has been operating under the Trump administration were put directly under the spotlight. Senator Patty Murray played a central role, raising issues that went far beyond procedural disagreements. She pointed to actions and decisions that she argued have eroded trust in one of the country's most important institutions. The hearing began in a fairly typical way. The chairman introduced Murray, giving her the floor to make her opening remarks and ask her questions. But the tone shifted quickly. Murray did not deliver a cautious or measured statement. Instead, she was direct, framing the situation as a deeply troubling erosion of law and order. She argued that corruption, cover-ups, and a pattern of political loyalty had taken the place of an independent justice system. Murray began by pointing out that respected career officials within the Department of Justice had been fired simply for doing their jobs. She noted that thousands of employees had been pushed out or forced to leave, with divisions of the department being dissolved and grants canceled without explanation. To her, this was not simply mismanagement. It looked deliberate. She wanted answers about how these decisions were made, why certain grants were terminated, and whether the department still had the capacity to carry out its responsibilities fairly and effectively. She also highlighted troubling developments beyond the internal reshuffling of staff. Murray referenced detainees, including U.S. citizens, being transported overseas without due process. She mentioned elected officials being detained when they tried to carry out oversight responsibilities, and even cited an incident where a U.S. senator was tackled to the ground for asking questions at a press conference. These examples, in her view, painted a picture of a system no longer grounded in the principles of accountability and respect for basic rights. From there, Murray turned to a recent whistleblower complaint. According to reports, a former Department of Justice attorney had filed a formal grievance accusing senior leadership, including the Deputy Attorney General, of defying court orders. The allegations included deliberate delays, misleading information being presented, and what was described as a lack of candor. Even more concerning, Murray noted, was the claim that the whistleblower had been fired not for misconduct, but for telling the truth to the court. When Murray asked Attorney General Pam Bondi whether she could confirm that the administration was committed to following court orders, Bondi gave a partial assurance. She said the administration would follow court orders, but she also argued that lower district courts were creating obstacles, implying that compliance would ultimately depend on decisions made by the Supreme Court. Murray pressed further, asking whether Bondi would commit to preventing conduct like that described in the whistleblower complaint. Instead of giving a clear yes or no, Bondi refused to comment on pending allegations and instead shifted focus to her personal support for colleagues in the department. She even said that she would, in her words, run through a wall for the Deputy Attorney General and another senior official. This exchange underscored the divide in the hearing. Murray's questions were centered on the integrity and independence of the Justice Department, while Bondi's responses often reflected personal loyalty to individuals rather than direct engagement with the allegations. The discussion then turned to public safety grants. Murray raised the issue of over 300 grants that had been terminated suddenly in April. These grants were not minor administrative items. They funded work that supported child welfare systems, investigations into drug trafficking, forensic examinations in sexual assault cases, and services for survivors of violence. The sudden cancellation of these programs, Murray argued, had already forced public safety organizations to cut staff and services, leaving communities without critical resources. She asked Bondi directly whether she was aware that one of the canceled grants had been used to support forensic exams in sexual assault cases. Bondi responded that she had no knowledge of that specific grant. She explained that some grants had been cut as part of broader budget adjustments, but also said that many had been reinstated following appeals. She offered to meet with Murray to review the details individually, but did not provide clear reasons for why such crucial funding was ever canceled in the first place. The lack of clarity was striking. On one hand, the Attorney General suggested that cuts were modest and part of ordinary adjustments. On the other, Murray's examples showed the real-world impact on programs that directly affect survivors of abuse and victims of crime. The exchange highlighted the gap between policy decisions made at the federal level and the lived consequences in communities across the country. Murray then raised another structural concern. She pointed to the Department of Justice's proposal to consolidate the Office on Violence Against Women into the larger Office of Justice Programs. To most viewers, this might sound like an administrative detail, but Murray emphasized that the issue was more serious. In 2002, Congress had passed a law explicitly establishing the office as a separate, permanent entity. The reason was clear. Issues of domestic violence, sexual assault, and gender-based crimes required specialized attention and resources. Folding the office into a broader bureaucracy, Murray argued, would dilute its focus and reduce its ability to serve victims effectively. She pressed Bondi to commit to maintaining the office's independence as required by law. Bondi responded that she would follow the law, but she disputed Murray's interpretation of what the law required. She insisted that consolidating the office was within her authority and claimed it would not reduce support for victims. Murray disagreed, stating that the law was unambiguous and that the move clearly violated the intent of Congress when it was passed. This part of the exchange revealed more than a disagreement about one office. It reflected a broader tension about how much independence should exist within the Department of Justice and how far political appointees could go in restructuring its functions. For Murray, the consolidation represented another step in undermining protections for vulnerable groups, while for Bondi, it was simply an administrative choice that she defended as efficient. Throughout this first half of the hearing, the pattern was consistent. Senator Murray posed sharp, specific questions about whistleblower allegations, canceled grants, and structural changes that she argued undermined the integrity of the Department of Justice. In response, Attorney General Bondi often avoided direct answers, claimed lack of knowledge, or shifted the conversation to her personal trust in senior officials. The exchanges were tense, and time limits forced Murray to cut off further discussion at several points. After Murray's questioning, commentators and observers highlighted how striking her tone had been. She was not measured or cautious. She was forceful and direct, saying that law and order were being replaced by chaos and corruption, and that the Justice Department under the Trump administration appeared to be operating less like an independent body and more like a political tool. For Murray, this was not just about mistakes or poor management, it was about an agenda that was changing the very purpose of the department. The list of concerns she laid out was long. Senior officials who had worked at the Department of Justice for years were fired. Entire divisions were closed down. Thousands of career employees had either been pushed out or offered buyouts. Grants that funded important public safety programs were canceled without explanation. For Marie, the lack of clear reasons was telling. When pressed, officials either refused to answer or provided vague statements that did not match the gravity of the consequences. At the center of her argument was the whistleblower complaint. This was not just a rumor or a leak story. It was a formal complaint filed by a former Justice Department attorney, someone who had worked inside the system. The document accused senior leaders of defying court orders, deliberately slowing down cases, and spreading misinformation. The language used in the complaint was serious, referring to lack of candor, deliberate delay, and disinformation. The complaint also alleged that the whistleblower was dismissed, not for misconduct or failure, but for telling the truth to a court. If accurate, that would mean the department was punishing its own attorneys for doing what the law required. This allegation alone raised major questions about accountability and transparency. When Senator Murray asked Attorney General Pam Bondi about this, the exchange quickly became tense. Bondi did not address the details of the complaint, citing its pending status. Instead, she pivoted to expressing personal loyalty to the Deputy Attorney General and another senior official mentioned in the allegations. She said openly that she would run through a wall for them, calling them two of the finest people she knew. For many watching, this was not the kind of answer they expected in a Senate hearing. Instead of defending the institution, Bondi defended individuals. Instead of assuring the public that the allegations would be taken seriously, she offered a personal statement of allegiance. This moment was widely noted as a shift from a legal defense to a loyalty pledge, raising doubts about whether accountability was even possible. The discussion then turned to the abrupt termination of over 300 public safety grants. These were not abstract line items in a budget. They supported work that touched directly on community safety. Some grants funded investigations into child abuse and neglect. Others supported forensic exams in sexual assault cases, or provided resources for children in foster care. Some targeted drug trafficking and other violent crimes. Cutting them meant cutting real services that affected people's lives. Murray asked Bondi whether she was aware that one of the canceled grants had supported forensic exams used in rape investigations. Bondi responded that she had no knowledge of that specific grant. She explained that some grants had been cut, estimating around 6% overall, but said that an appeal process existed and that some grants had already been reinstated. She offered to meet privately to discuss specific cases, but did not give a clear explanation for why these particular grants were ever canceled. This answer left open questions. On the one hand, Bondi was presenting the cuts as relatively small and part of normal adjustments. On the other, the sudden cancellation of 300 grants with no clear justification and no warning to affected organizations suggested a larger pattern of disregard for the impact on communities. For public safety groups already struggling with limited resources, the loss of funding meant cutting staff, canceling programs, and turning away people in need. Another major issue raised was the proposal to consolidate the Office on Violence Against Women into the Office of Justice Programs. This might sound administrative, but the context mattered. In 2002, Congress had passed legislation making the office a permanent, independent part of the Justice Department. The reason was to ensure that issues like domestic violence, sexual assault, and gender-based crimes received dedicated resources and attention. By keeping the office separate, Congress wanted to prevent these issues from being lost in the broader bureaucracy. At best, Murray argued that folding the office into a larger structure not only violated the intent of the law, but also reduced the ability of victims to access services. She said that the move was effectively a cut, reducing resources for an area of work that needed more, not less. When asked directly whether she would commit to keeping the office independent, Bondi said she would follow the law, but rejected Murray's interpretation of it. She said the consolidation would go ahead and that she would not keep the office separate. She insisted that victims would not lose support, but she did not explain how reducing resources and eliminating independence would improve outcomes. For Murray, the refusal was clear evidence that the administration was disregarding congressional intent and undermining protections for survivors. This exchange reinforced the broader concern. The Justice Department was not only making questionable decisions, but also resisting oversight and refusing to provide straightforward answers. At every stage, Murray pushed for clarity and accountability. Bondi's responses often came back to personal trust in colleagues or a lack of awareness about the details. Observers pointed out that the combination of firing whistleblowers, cutting critical programs, restructuring independent offices, and pledging loyalty to specific officials rather than the institution all suggested something more than disorganization. It suggested a coordinated effort to reshape the Justice Department in ways that weakened its independence. For Murray, this was not just about political disagreement. It was about whether the department still functioned as an impartial enforcer of the law. Her conclusion was that what she had uncovered pointed to sabotage rather than incompetence. Programs that supported victims were not being cut by accident. Officials were not being fired randomly. The consistent thread was that those who told the truth or carried out their responsibilities without political loyalty were being pushed out. By the time her remarks concluded, Murray had shifted the focus from individual disputes to the bigger picture. She described a Justice Department that was no longer just making mistakes, but was being actively reshaped to serve political ends. The people harmed by these changes, she argued, were not politicians but ordinary people, survivors of abuse, children in foster care, communities struggling with violence. The consequences of these decisions, in her view, went far beyond Washington. If grants were cut, survivors lost access to care. If whistleblowers were silenced, the public lost access to the truth. If the Office on Violence Against Women was weakened, victims lost protection. These were not abstract issues. They were changes that directly affected lives. The hearing ended with questions that still have no clear answers. If the Justice Department resists following court orders, what does that mean for the rule of law? If officials can cut funding for essential programs without oversight, what does that mean for accountability? If the department's leaders respond to allegations with loyalty pledges rather than explanations, what does that mean for trust in the institution? Senator Murray made it clear that this was not about partisan politics. It was about whether the Justice Department still served its purpose as an independent institution, whether it upheld the law fairly, and whether it protected the rights of citizens. She warned that the actions she described could not be dismissed as minor adjustments or disagreements. They formed a pattern, and once that pattern was recognized, it could not be ignored. The exchanges between Murray and Bondi may have seemed like another heated moment in a political hearing, but for many, they highlighted the stakes. A Justice Department seen as politicized and unaccountable risks losing the public's trust. And without that trust, its ability to function effectively is undermined. The testimony and the whistleblower complaint raise serious questions that will not be resolved quickly, but they also opened the door for broader discussions about the future of the Justice Department, the role of oversight, and the balance between political authority and institutional independence.